Welcome to the Determined Truth Podcast.
Want the truth? You can't handle the truth.
Where we aim to explore questions of truth, the scriptures, and what it means for the church today. Here are your hosts, Rob Dalrymple and Vinnie Angelo.
Hey, welcome in, everyone. My name is Vinnie, and I have COVID. I'm just saying that now in case you want to wear a mask while you listen to this episode.
My name is Rob, and I have... Oh, I can't tell you all the things that I have.
Yes, that would be a HIPAA violation right there. We're in the First Thessalonians series, and last week we started talking about poverty issues as relates to conversations in Thessalonians that talk about working and finances, and we've been talking about that. We don't need to rehash that. But we started talking about the conversation of classism. Did we start that last week, or I think we hinted at it. Yeah. Sorry, yeah. I have COVID brain right now, so it's hard to remember what is what. But
which is actually an improvement.
It is. I function a little higher.
On the Vinnie brain.
Yes, COVID brain is a far improvement. So it's going to be a bummer when I come back down to Vinnie brain. Do you want to define, how would we define classism? Just to revisit that real quick.
The key distinction that we made was that a person has a certain color skin or a certain ethnicity that we put them in certain races and they are what they are. And a certain gender discriminations, and you're male, you're female, you are. With classism, it's rich and poor, and we have this mentality that you can go from one class to the other. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, make yourself whatever you want to be. And there's a sense where there is movement within classes, but we think then, therefore, that the ones who are wealthy in the upper class have earned their right to be there, where the ones who are in the lower classes deserve to be there because of poor choices. And that's one of the misnomers that we're getting at. No, as we started saying in our last episode, was poverty is a cycle that's hard to get out of that poverty cycle. And one of the best ways to get out of it is through education, but then the educational system's not adequate or equitable. And so some people that are born into a wealthy environment, it's an easier go for them to gain wealth. Whereas people that are born impoverished, it's harder for them to get out of that.
No, it doesn't mean that people cannot be born into whether wealth or middle wealth, and they could definitely lose that and fall into poverty. So we're not saying that this is the absolute rule. We're just saying that you're not stuck in one system, or you're not maybe determined, or it's not a fatalistic thing where you're just here, therefore this is where you're going to be.
So that's a little bit of what I'm trying to get at. I think we're saying the same thing, but I'm not sure. And that is, the problem with classism is we put the burden on, you're in that class because you deserve it, whether it's good or bad. And the answer is that's not necessarily the case. You go in that class of wealth because you were just born into that. Or even upper middle class, and then you were able to get into higher institutions and Harvard and whatever else. I was born next to Harvard. That's pretty close, isn't it?
That's true. I was born at Stanford. Did you know that?
It didn't help you at all,
It did not. You'd think the osmosis of everything, but they don't put anything special in the water.
Goodness. All right. Anyways, I digress. So the reality is that you're born in that environment, and the advantages are already there, or the disadvantages are already there. And sometimes those disadvantages or advantages are insurmountable. And even the idea of you could be upper middle class or whatever and become impoverished. Yeah, but a lot of times the safeguards that are in place, you file for bankruptcy, and then you have other assets in your camp, whether it's an education or whether it's experience or whatever, that just makes it easier to gain capital again.
Whereas I know many business people, even small business people, but there's some who go bankrupt and then they're done. That just completely wipes them out. I know other business people who have gone bamped, and it really...
They become president.
They become...
No, it's true. I wasn't joking.
He's been bankrupt
six times.
6 or 7 times,
for bankruptcy for corporations.
But you could be bankrupt and it could really not have a huge impact on you, or it could completely level you. So a question though, even as we have this conversation, and I generally do not like buzzwords. I do not like... Usually the words that people use,
I do not like green eggs and ham, Sam.
My son hates that book. He hates Dr. Seuss. I don't understand that.
Oh, I love Dr.
I know.
Seuss.
But the word privilege was a very popular buzzword, I want to say. Probably not as much now, but maybe over the last 6 or 7 years that had become a really big buzzword. And I think it's overused, so I don't like using it, because it ends up being just like, it's what the liberals use as whatever. It's just a non-starter and that sort of thing. But you can't deny that there's a sense to privilege.
Exactly.
And while it's mainly used in like white privilege in that sort of sense, which I don't think it's inappropriate in many ways to do that. Not that I want to say I don't feel bad for being a white guy. I was born a white guy. This is how God determined I was going to be born. So this is what I am.
I'm going to stay this color?
Yeah, I get tanned. But we, as an Italian, we have good skin. So we look pretty good. But there is an aspect of where you're born at financially. Right off the bat, it's a privilege in terms of it's getting you a head start on things. You're just not worrying about things that other people are worrying about. And I think last week I used the example of teaching in two different schools. There's this in school that two different school districts. Did we talk about offline, or was that on the show?
I don't remember.
Okay, me neither. But like I talked about how one year I taught music at a high school in a very
it was on the show.
Okay,
I think,
in a very rich neighborhood, and then over the hill in Oakland in a very poor neighborhood.
Yeah.
Privilege is a huge difference between those two schools. And it's because what did the kids do that showed up? They're the same 14-year-old kids. One happened to be born in one zip code and one happened to be born in the other. And they didn't do anything good or bad of themselves. It's Jacob that I loved. I'm just using Romans chapter 9 language there, but it's like, what did they do? They were just born where they were born at. They had no control in that. But there's a privilege that goes along that just, there's things you're not worrying about that you have advantages for. Is that something that we could attach to the idea of classism and say, hey, this is something that goes along with it, man. You're the privilege with being in a certain class. And likewise, it doesn't mean you're bad because you were born somewhere else.
No, or that you deserve the lot in life. That's almost Indian.
Yeah.
The Indian
I was going to say, it sounds like
you
a caste
deserve that
system.
lot in life. That's exactly what it is. And there's a video, I'll attach it to the show notes, that I showed Vinnie. I think I showed it to you last week or whatever it was, before we started even. And it's a youth leader at a camp. He's got 50 or more kids at this camp. Seriously, a lot of ethnic diversity at the camp. And he says, okay, we're going to have a race for $100. They're all lining up. Some of them are athletes. Some of them are not athletes, male, women, male, females. All. And then he says, okay, you get to take 2 steps forward if both parents are still in your home. If you still live with both birth parents. And these kids take 2 steps forward. Okay. And obviously certain kids don't. You get to take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. You get to take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about where your next meal is going to come from. You get and these kids are taking 2 steps forward, and they're not thinking about other kids are not taking steps. They're thinking, oh, this is cool. I get to go, and you get to go, and it's fun. And they're looking and smiling at each other, but not realizing that people are still back on the starting line. And so finally this youth leader goes, okay, I want you all to turn around and look behind you now. And all of a sudden, these kids that have maybe taken 1 step or 2 or none at all, they're like, oh, whoa, wait a minute. And then he said, okay, ready, go. And those kids in the back of the line really ran hard, as you saw, but they had no chance because these other kids were 50 steps ahead of them before the race even started. And I think that's something that we need to consider, that it's not so simple to say. And part of it also, let me add one more thought. Part of it also is the fact that we have this theological construct that says we're all wretched sinners. No one does good. And therefore, that's your condition because you're a wretched sinner. And not realizing the fact that, guess what? Their physical, economic condition is because of not simply their sin, but because of the socioeconomic or the zip code that they were born in and the family situation that they were born in. And it's your fault or your family's fault because your father's in prison. But then you realize the racial prejudice of the prison system and the incarceration rate and all the inequities that go along with that. And it's not fair that kid's in prison because and we can go on for a long time. So,
and even there, as someone who does affirm the idea of the total depravity of mankind in a Reformation sort of way. And I know that's you and I would differ on that, but I would hold to that view. And I would say, and because of that, we live in a sinful world that has been affected by sin in all kinds of ways, which means you're going to have certain people who are oppressed and you're going to have communities oppressed and you're going to have sinful system. All systems are going to be sinful because sinful people are running them. Therefore, you're going to have certain people who are marginalized just by birth, and not because they're a bad person, but because that's what marginalized systems do. They're meant to do that.
Perfect. Yeah. And the 2 points that I like to accent on would be A, total depravity, that's whatever you want, that's fine. But that person's still made in the image of God.
Absolutely.
That person's still a being of, and I know you affirm that. And so that person over there, but we don't think that way. We think, okay, they're wretched sinners. They did drugs. That's why they're homeless. And the answer is no, that guy's homeless because he's an Army veteran. He's homeless because of what we did, sending him to war. And then we don't care for them when he comes back because, they only get 5 years of benefits and they can't prove that actually happened. That trauma happened in Afghanistan. What are you talking about? How could you not care? You got to be kidding me. And then the second thing that I would like to affirm on that is the fact that because of the sin within humanity, whether it's depravity or not, that doesn't matter. And that is when you get power, you can exercise that power over somebody, take advantage of them. And that's what I'm trying to say with the politics discussions that we've been having. Can't we all see the fact power and money run these things? And even if that person's a good person, the temptation to be corrupted by power and money is so great. It's going to happen, people. And then we don't critique our own political party. We don't critique our own political candidates. We don't critique our own nation. Or we don't critique, let's just go on, because Vinnie knows, I was on a live, as we're recording this today, I had a live stream this morning with a British doctor who served 3 tours in Gaza. And it's, how can we not critique what Israel and the United States is doing to the people of Gaza? This is clear what's happening here. She said when she entered Gaza, there were 2 to 3 miles worth of trucks waiting to get into Gaza. She goes, it's not getting in. I saw all the aid trucks. And then she said, oh, but the argument is that Hamas is stealing the aid trucks and stealing the food, and they're selling the food in the black market to fund their arms. And she said, if that's what's happening, she said, I saw no evidence of that. Her response was, just flood the market with food. Just flood Gaza with food, and then there's no market for Hamas to sell it on the black market because everybody has food. And it's, and her stories of just what she's doing and the fact that they have the anesthesia. There's a certain type of anesthesia that when people wake up, they don't wake up in immense pain because we don't have any of that.
Oh, man.
You can't control the pain when they wake up and that's something that you want to handle right from the beginning. Just 40% of the people she operates on are children, 14 and under. We've got to realize that the social inequities are such that power and privilege can often lead to oppression or the marginalized or whatever, and we have to critique this. And that's the whole biblical injunction, by the way. How long, O Lord? How long, O Lord?
Yeah.
God heard the cries of the Israelites as they suffered in Egypt.
Yeah.
Sorry, I digressed there, but I had to get that out.
Yeah, no, that's good. Get one of those out of the way. I haven't been sick in a while, so I forgot how to do a podcast while sick.
You've looked horrible for the last 6 or 8 podcasts, though. So it's amazing that you haven't felt that way.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone. We want to thank you for joining us on today's podcast. And we want to remind you that everything we provide at Determined Truth is free of charge. And this even includes all of the teaching that Rob, Danny, and myself do on a weekly basis in our online Bible studies, live streams, and our coaching for pastors in India and around the world. We don't have any supporters who get special behind-the-scenes access, but we can only do this with the generous support from those of you who can afford to give. So if you'd prayerfully consider supporting us with a fully tax-deductible donation, with anything from $5 a month or more, we will continue to challenge the church to be the church. To give, go to determinedtruth.com and click on the Give tab, or find the link in today's show notes. Thanks.
So one of the issues that I want to raise, and it's nuance, and we have to nuance, and I know, and you might help me with the nuancing, is this notion that you can't give money to the poor to help them out of their poverty because they're just going to waste it. It's going to be wasted, or resources into that community, whether it's individual or corporate resources. And numerous studies over the past 2 decades have demonstrated that providing money directly to the poor does not necessarily lead to laziness or dependency, but rather results in increased initiatives, productivity, and overall improving their well-being. For example, one of the big things that's happened a lot in the international world is the idea of microloans, that somebody applies for a loan because they want to start a business, and you give them $100 to start a soap business in Nigeria or whatever. And the idea is that they're supposed to pay it back, and it's an investment. Not that you're trying to make money on it, but what happens is they end up paying the loan back, and then you take that money and you loan it to somebody else to start a business. And they're extremely successful with this. So the World Bank Review in 2018 wrote a paper called The Myth of Welfare Dependency. And it reviewed 30 government and NGO cash transfer programs and said, quote, there's no systematic evidence that cash transfers discourage work. People use access to cash to get better jobs, to buy tools or transportation, and free themselves from exploitative labor. Then there's the UNICEF and the Poverty Action Lab. The programs in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, it showed increased attendance in schools, better nutrition for the children. But which, by the way, when we were in Mackenzie and I went on a missions trip to Guatemala with our church in Bakersfield there. And one of the things that would happen was lack of access to clean water. So we were providing water for the community, for the church, and the church would provide it for the community. And the children were short and small because of stunted growth, because of bad health, poor nutrition. One of the things that poor water does, not only makes them sick, but it means that they miss more school. All this has not just physical effects, but actually educational effects. You provide them with clean water, and guess what? Better schooling, better nutrition, better health. So families then took the money, the UNICEF, the JPAL organization, to start entrepreneurial ventures, enhance dignity and autonomy. There's many examples. One I want to point out here, the Cherokee Casino Dividend, which is interesting. This is in North Carolina. There's a Native American community that would receive annual payouts, the Native Americans would, from this casino. I think it was the Harrah's Casino on Native land. And basically everybody in the community got a dividend. I think it's like $12,000 a year before taxes just a check for doing nothing besides being Native American. And the research showed, which the Roosevelt Institute was part of that these payments were linked to improved mental health, reduced hospitalizations, lower rates of substance dependency amongst recipients, and then even the pandemic checks and tax credits. The studies show that there were no significant work disincentive, especially among lower income families. They use that to better themselves. So there's a large evidence to say it actually helps overall. And again, my whole point would be, let's just really especially deal with the school systems. Let's change the educational systems because that is clearly catalytic. But I'm sure you might have some things to say on that.
Sorry.
This is AI Vinnie, because Vinnie is no longer available right now, and he's clearing his throat right now. He looks horrible, but AI video Vinnie looked great.
You think he sounds bad? You should see him.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a firm believer in trying to be holistic in when you're offering support for people, and I know you would agree with that as well.
Okay.
Oftentimes, when you don't have something and you haven't had the opportunity to have it modeled for you, you don't know what to do with it. And you see this all the time with poor athletes who go pro and get these huge signing bonuses. And what is the statistic? 80% of professional athletes go broke by the time they retire, or something like that. I forget that. There's a ESPN 30 for 30 on it.
Oh, cool.
You love it. It's called Broke. I watched it was like 10 years ago or something like that. And it's 80% of NBA players go broke by the time they retire from the league. And oftentimes it's because they don't know what to do with their money because they've never had it modeled for them. You have money. And obviously at that level,
Plus you have the sharks coming in as well, trying to get
the thing. The thing of trying to keep up with image, right? And so you're just trying to like keep up with what's around you. But then you have all these other people leeching on. You have family and friends coming after you. There's all these areas. And then you're just spending, hey, I got this endless fountain. I'm just going to spend on it, not thinking, oh, I'm probably only going to play in this league. This might be my only contract. And then I'm going to have nothing for the rest of my life.
Right.
And so part of even with them, we need to educate people on how to be smart with their finances.
Sure. No doubt.
And so we would want to do that at all levels as well. And I think especially for lower income folks, if you've never seen what to do with, if you've never had the opportunity to figure out what do we do with money when you have more than this is what I have to feed myself today. What do you do when you have something in the bank, or when you're not behind on anything? I think part of coming in and not only providing the funds, but also teaching people what do you do with this, that's equally as important. And I know that at a church I worked at, we had a community center where we would regularly feed people every day and do that sort of thing. One of the best classes that they did was stuff like actually teaching people how to deal with finances, because that's just a skill that they lacked. And so you could help them all you want. But oftentimes people just don't have that mindset. And I know my father-in-law, I've talked about him a lot just as an immigrant. I have so much respect for him. He was sharing with me last week about when he came over to America as a refugee, 22-year-old guy or whatever, lived on a dairy farm out here, had nothing. And he had a friend who came over around the same time in a similar situation, same island that he came from in Portugal, for the Azores. And now you look at him, however, 50 years later or whatever it's been. My father-in-law retired from a union factory job as an electrician, owns his own house, sent his daughters to college, paid for his daughters' weddings, did all the stuff, right? His friends, we'll call him Joe, basically started at the same factory that he was at. And guess what? Got a couple ladies pregnant, alcoholic, lives in his car. He still lives in his car. He's a homeless guy. And my father-in-law tries to help out when he can. They had the same opportunities. What's the difference between the two? It's one guy did something with the opportunities he had, which is my father, and he had more wisdom, I think, and then took the opportunities he had and maximized them, where this other guy he drank them away and just wanted a party. And so it's one of those things where you have to do something with it. But my father-in-law took advantage of the opportunities that he had where this other guy didn't. And that's anecdotal to the,
sure.
And so I definitely don't like painting with a broad brush. But the thing is, I think you have to love someone. It's not just saying, here's a handout, but it's saying, and now how can we empower you to do something with this, to make lifelong shifts, to use Jesus language, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime, right? And I think that's ultimately the goal. And that's part of rebuilding systems and rebuilding structures and empowering communities at whole. And that's so much an important aspect of funding people.
Yeah, I think I have two thoughts, if I can remember them both. I've noticed this as I look back and go, oh yeah, I was part of this system where we think we're better than the other.
Sure.
And I think that's one of the mentalities that okay, here we are, the church, you're coming to us for help and wish you could be like us, but you're not. So let's see and I think the poor are often apprehensive about coming for help because they feel like they're going to be put down, made to be inferior. And we have to overcome that and not allow that to be part of the mentality. The second thing
hold on your second one.
Yeah.
Would you even say it like, I'm a believer that if you're going to have a soup kitchen or whatever, do you make everyone have to sit through a gospel message before you'll give them the food?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the thing. Is like, no, like just give them the food and then allow them to have the opportunity to stay and hear the message if they want.
Isn't giving them the food the gospel message?
I think it's part of it.
Yeah, it is. It's the gospel message. And so, sure, I don't have a problem with preaching, but making it conditionality or whatever. One of the easy solutions to this whole issue would be, let's change the educational system, give everybody at least an equality with whatever that might mean with education, quality teachers, quality administrators, quality support programs, quality textbooks, and give them the opportunity to have that same opportunity to get into the elite universities as everybody else and make all that affordable. That's a straightforward, significant change that will make a lasting difference. Now, will it fix everything? No, it won't fix everything. That's no doubt about that. But one of the problems that is inherent within this whole system is this mentality of, but I deserve what I have and I need what I have and I don't want to let go of that. And that really becomes the problem. I think that's why Jesus is saying you can't love God and mammon, which we'll get to in a few weeks when we talk about the scriptures itself. We're kind of laying a foundation there, which we normally would do it the other way around. We have to get beyond this mentality of saying, oh, but I have these things, and as long as I don't have to let go of my needs and my comforts. No, we actually as a church have to let go of our needs and our comforts. Let me make a couple commercial announcements right here, Vinnie, at this point in time, because it's relevant as well. So we're doing a series of videos released every Wednesday night as we record this in the summer of 2025 called Revelation Revealed. So if you're listening to this in a year or whatever from now, go to the Determined Truth YouTube channel and look at the playlist Revelation Revealed. And in that series, what I'm looking at is certain parts of the book of Revelation to say, what was John's message to the church then, and how does it apply to our church today? And we look at the issue of, therefore, immigration. What does that mean? Because it's a big issue in 2025. War, things like that. And one of the things I raised in one of the conclusion episodes, which we'll release if you're listening to this live or somewhat reasonable, in the fall of 2025, is we have to grapple with the massive amount of wealth that the American church has. There's a problem here and there's an issue there. So I want to point that out. That's going to be coming up in future live streams. We also have a series of live streams on the issue of immigration. So I did 3 recordings on immigration that have gone live or will be going live. Well, by the time this goes live, we'll have those 3 episodes will all be live. And we've also interviewed some scholars to talk about why are they even coming to our border? And one of the things I point out in that series is the fact that people crossing a border is not actually illegal if they're seeking asylum. That's actually legal. The United States helped write the international law after World War II. It's actually legal. The problem is the U.S. is taking away all the they're taking away the entire system for asylum seekers. So they come here seeking asylum and there's no system in place actually where they can go through a legal process and they, by definition, become illegal. But one of the questions we have to ask is why are they coming here? So we have some interviews, and I addressed that on the live stream that I record, but we also have some interviews with scholars, one of which will be a professor from the University of Toronto, a Latin and Central American scholar, talking about why are they leaving? And it's largely because of what the United States has done in those countries. I think that's a really important conversation there. And then over the course of the fall of 2025, I'll be recording a series of live streams as well on the book of Revelation, 1 through 22, just walking ourselves through the book of Revelation for those that want to study that as well. So I encourage you to pay attention to those. We've done a number of live streams on an Israel-Gaza series as well. Just some unbelievable conversations like the one we had this morning that's already live with Dr. Rosie, a British surgeon. So we've got a lot of things going on, a lot of things that we're doing. Of course, the ministry in India we're continuing to do as well. I just want to make sure that our listeners are aware of those things.
Sure.
So subscribe to our Determined Truth YouTube page. And if we don't have your contact info so we can send out a monthly email or maybe every couple weeks email to let you know about what's going on, please go to the determinedtruth.com page and go to the contact tab and let us know who you are so we can add you to our mailing list.
Very good. Hey, we
Thanks.
talked about the poor and providing assistance to the poor and talking about some of the critiques that come there. Oh, it's just going to make them lazy. They need to work for it, blah, blah, blah.
Or it's their fault.
Or it's their fault.
Yeah.
What's amazing, and this really started for me as an adult in my lifetime, paying attention to it, like in 2008, 2009, 2010, where you had the financial crisis in America due to housing. Yeah. And all of a sudden, you started having the bailouts. And that became a joke for me. A lot of my friends, gosh. We'd go to lunch somewhere and it's expensive. And I guess there's no bailout here for us. But you have all these multi-billion-dollar companies getting these bailouts. But that's something where the history of America, there's just been bailout after bailout for the wealthy.
For the wealthy.
And that kind of sometimes will come along with a trickle-down idea that says, oh, we're going to give it to them, and then it's going to get to everyone else, which we find that's just crap. That doesn't usually...
That doesn't happen.
No, it just...
But that's the justification.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But why do you think that's something that is socially acceptable? And even like we find it as morally acceptable. We don't challenge that one as much.
Oh, that's...
and actually, you know what I'm thinking about
it? Point.
When we do challenge it, we'll justify it, or we're like, that sucks, but it needs to happen because of this.
It's going to save the economy.
Yeah, it's going to save this. But look at this guy produces all these jobs but those people are just lazy over here. How come we can't say they were just bad with their money? Or, hey, sometimes you swing and you lose you swing and you miss on some things in life, and you got to take your lumps.
So there's 2 points I want to make here. Number one is the massive hypocrisy that when the poor do it, we condemn them for it, and we say there's no way we're going to support them. But when the wealthy do it, we bail them out, and they get to file bankruptcy, and then they get a fresh start, and because they have a Harvard degree, so they can go get their better job, and they have all this experience, and they can make all their money all over again, and they did it again. We bail them out. That's hypocrisy when we condemn one but we don't condemn the other. The second point that we've made already, and that is, this is what those in power do. They're going to make sure that they look out for one another. So when they fail, help me out here, buddy. But when those who are not in power fail, sorry about that. Bummer for you, but you deserve what you get. We bail out the rich when they make bad decisions, but guess what? We don't bail out the poor. So here's a couple of examples. $700 billion. That's like a couple weeks' pay for us, Vinnie, here at Determined Truth. But anyways, it was called the Troubled Asset Relief Program for major banks, Citigroup, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, etc. Now, back in 2006, 7, and 8, my wife at the time, she still is an underwriter, thank God. And so she would come home and she goes, Rob, she goes, we're doing all these loans with no income, no asset verification. Okay. So I know that this person does not make $14,000 a month working at Target, but they say their income's $14,000 a month. And they work at Target and they have a landscaping business on the side of her. And she goes, but I can't make them verify that, but I know it's fraudulent. She would also say, Rob, there's fake W-2 forms that they would give, fraudulent ones, and I can spot them because she's trained. She goes, but I would show it to the bank, that my supervisor, and like, oh, don't worry about it. Just look past it. She goes, and my wife would say, I'm not going to sign off on this loan because if it comes back to us, it comes back to me. Why'd I sign off on it? But the supervisors would sign off on them. They're approving all these, no are fraudulent. So they had fake tax returns, fake W-2 forms, and all these people were getting loans. She goes, there's no way these are legit. And guess what happens? The whole market crumbles. Okay. Now, my wife loses her job because all of a sudden people aren't buying and selling homes. So we lose more than half our income because she made a lot more than the pastor friend over here did, than her pastor spouse did. And so now we have this house that we can't afford. We live in the Bay Area and we live on the east of the East Bay, but we couldn't afford it. So we went to the bank because my wife's an underwriter. She knows how to do these things. And we said, listen, by the way, we were in a picture of our home with our daughter was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And the title of it was, the United States' most underwater community, because our entire community was 90% of the homes were underwater. Where underwater meaning the value of the home is less than the amount that we owe on the bank, to the bank. Now, that wasn't our problem. We didn't care about that. What we cared about was we couldn't make the payment and we were going to foreclose. And that's bad for the banks, by the way, because all the banks, when the houses are foreclosed, they all sit empty and squatters come into empty homes. They destroy the property. So it's actually bad for the banks to have empty properties. And it's hard to resell it. So we went to the bank and we said, listen, my wife would know what it's called. You might remember, but we said, would you take our loan value and cut this much off of it, which is still more than our house was worth, and we can make that payment and we'll stay in the house. You don't have to foreclose, because if you foreclose, you're going to sell it at an even lower amount. So we're willing to give you a higher amount for it than what we have right now. We can't pay what it really is, so just lower that amount. We can pay that mortgage. We'll stay in the home. It won't be a foreclosure on our record, and it won't be a foreclosure that you have to worry about. Win-win. And you know what they told us? They said, your credit score is so high that people with your credit scores always find a way to make the payments. So the answer was, we won't do it for you. And we're like, we actually can't because we lost it. So we end up doing a short sale because A, that doesn't hurt our record as much, and B, it's a sale, so it's good for the banks as well. We literally lost every single thing we had because every dollar we owned was in the house. And we started renting for a few years. And we had an inheritance that we got, which was minor, but that was enough to be able to buy a house. a few years later. So that's how we own the house that we have now. The banks were not only getting bailed out, but their executives were getting bonuses. And yet here we are getting almost nothing. And I think that's criminal. I think that's totally, completely criminal. But when you have power or whatever, you can do.
Yeah.
And then there's all the other examples. I think you mentioned the auto industry, the bailouts. I think, what was that, the 70s or 80s or whatever, the auto industry was bailed out. And again, all that's to protect jobs and that, we get it. But if the whole idea is I can't give money to that poor person on the street because they need to learn their lesson, then why do we not hold accountable these executives when they were doing things that they knew was criminal and they knew was wrong and illegal, and they not only didn't go to prison, okay, all right, put that guy in prison because that's criminal.
Yeah.
And take his job away and take his money and make him pay. But no, they were getting bonuses.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, I could share my own story. It would be a little redundant of buying a house in 2006 when you first get married, and then having to short sale it a first couple of years later.
What month in 2006 did you buy?
We went into escrow in February. It closed like a week before we got married in March, and then we moved in when we got married. So yeah, it was.
So we bought that house in June, and the market started to crumble in July.
Yep. Yeah, and we bought. It was an old. For us, it was like a 1986 house that we bought that house still, I don't think, has rebounded to be where we paid for it at. We paid like $486 for it, and then it ended up short selling at $161.
That's pretty similar to ours, but the numbers were a little bit bigger because that's moving back.
And it was the same thing.
Area.
Like our situation was, Shayla started working a year or two before we got married. And so she's a teacher, a first, second year teacher. She lives with her parents. Her parents let her live with her. She saves every penny that she earns as a teacher. And that's what went into that down payment of that house. And then we lost it. So she basically worked for a year for free, which she's a teacher in Tracy, actually. The pay scale was so low down there. She basically worked for free out there. You're in the timeout chair for years because you short sale, and it just totally sets you back. But it's the thing, there's a lot of people who benefited greatly while so many other people just got absolutely railed on that. And it's not right. It's not just, but we bail out certain people. And we say things like, we don't like it or it's not fair, but we don't call it morally wrong. And we don't judge the people. Or criminal. Whereas we do, the point is we have a double standard where we often do that with poor communities. We'll say that they're morally bad. We make a judgment, an ethical or a moral call on the person themselves, where we don't do that at the upper level. It's the same thing. It just, even as a joke, like you look at just blue collar crime. And we have this disdain for, think about even right now, it's not blue collar crime, but we look at the immigration system in America, and what's the language that's being used? Illegal immigrants they're criminals. Even if they're not the rapists.
They're eating our cats and dogs.
Well, and even if it's just the people they haven't done any criminal crime outside of just being here illegally, they're the criminals. We're saying this about them. Yet we have no problem with a Martha Stewart who's involved in insider trading, these supposedly white-collar crimes. And we think of it as this harmless thing where how many thousands of people, tens of thousands of people did she affect by insider trading? And it's like, we are okay with that sort of thing. We make jokes about that sort of thing. So we just have this double standard when it comes to crime. Exactly. There's a lot we could talk about it there. But when it comes down to the idea of loving your neighbor, and I had a friend who he posted on Facebook yesterday, he posted the narrative of Luke chapter 10 and the Good Samaritan. And he started with the question of, who is my neighbor? And it made me think, and I even commented on there, if you're reading this narrative right now and wanting to say, if you're relating it to modern day geopolitics, and especially when it comes to immigration, and you're saying, yeah, but Jesus doesn't mean this, then you're probably on the religious leader side of the equation. You're probably not understanding the narrative. And so there's a sense of, we need to love our neighbor the way, who is our neighbor and how do we love them? That doesn't mean we always give carte blanche. It doesn't mean that we don't have boundaries in place. It doesn't mean, I think loving your neighbor means actually wanting the best for them, not just giving them what they're asking for. But before we get to there, let's just say, what does it mean to love your neighbor, and how could we start the conversation before we say what about this and what about that? Because I think that clouds our judgment. What does it mean to love our neighbor, especially when it comes to finances? What's the basic biblical ethic of loving your neighbor?
And I think we're going to develop that more as we go over the next couple episodes, what it actually looks like. But I would simply say providing pathways out of poverty is loving your neighbor. If poverty is linked with mental health problems, if poverty is linked with physical health problems, if poverty is linked with opportunities for success, opportunities for jobs, security, then the number one thing, and by the way, I don't know if we said this on a podcast or not, I know we've talked about this on live streams, but the number one reason for abortions is poverty. So if you're really pro-life, then one of the best ways to reduce the number of abortions is to reduce the poverty issues. And you look at spousal abuse or domestic abuse. And one of the reasons why women go back into domestic environments like that is because they don't have a place to go on their own. There's no housing available to them. So they have to go back into this setting. So providing pathways, poor nutrition, access to healthcare, and inadequate housing lead to poor health, higher rates of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, asthma, all these things that are linked, their job performance, shorter lifespan. And as we said before, as I've said at least throughout these 2 episodes, education is the primary path out of poverty. So I think to love our neighbor as ourselves means we need to change the school system so it's equitable in giving these children around the world, but especially in our own neighborhoods, access to equal education. Provide after-school activities for them, provide fair housing and justice reforms. I think all of that is what it means to love our neighbor as ourselves.
And even you say pathways out of poverty, and it's like, that sounds socialistic, that sounds liberal, whatever you want to say. And we mentioned a week or two ago, those labels aren't really our concerns. That's not the paradigm that we're functioning from. Let's even bring it back. The Old Testament law, the Mosaic law, literally had this built into the fabric of it. It's pathways out of poverty. The year of Jubilee. It's the idea of that you could reset all things because we're not establishing these snowballs of oppression, or just even the snowballs of not being able to get, because oppression sounds very active, but the snowball of not being able to get from underneath that which is above you.
And we're going to look at that in the next couple of episodes. What does the biblical text actually say then when it comes to economics? And you're right on point by saying what we're not doing is saying we're advocating for a particular social construct or a particular economic system or a particular political party. We're not doing that. We're simply saying this is what it looks like. I'm not suggesting that whether the Democrats do it better than the Republicans or Republicans do it better than the socialists. We're not talking about that. We're simply saying this is what we've got to do and figure out, of course, no matter what we do, there's always going to be human systems with power corrupting it.
Yes.
So that's what we're trying to bring attention to. So in these 2 episodes that we did here, it was A, it's not necessarily their fault. B, the whole idea of giving them support and care isn't going to make things worse. It often makes things better. And C, watch out for those in power and abusing the system who also, if I were to add a D, control the narrative, and thus they control our thinking on these issues. So we think, oh, they're bad people. There's classism. No, that's what those in power want us to think so that they can maintain their power and their privilege. Think about this. This is something that we're going to be talking about in the live streams. So by the time this episode goes live, I believe we'll have had 2 live streams on immigration with guests, as well as the 3 that I recorded myself. One of the things that's happening with immigration is, A, those in power are running the narrative to say, we got to get these people out of the country, they're dangerous for us, or they're bad for our economy, which they're not necessarily bad for our economy. That's not mostly untrue. And they're demonizing them, making them the enemy and everything else. The reality is, this is actually undermining our economy because a lot of farmers around the country and a lot of hospitals in certain parts of the country are out of business and healthcare facilities are going out of, it's actually having a serious effect, trickle-down effect on the economy. But guess what? Those in power are eating the same food today that they ate yesterday, and they will continue to eat tomorrow because it's not affecting them. And so that's when we got to go, wait a minute, it's wrong what's going on, and you don't care because it's not impacting you at all.
And to make that point, it's the rich person doesn't care if they don't want to, but they don't care. They can pay $2 for the avocado instead of $1. Whereas the middle class or lower class person says, I can't afford $2 for the avocado anymore. I'm just not going to eat healthy. And now I have to supplement myself with a cheaper food that's going to be bad for me. And now I have to get my calories in some other kind of way. And it just creates these other systems that create other issues. Now you have healthcare issues. I mean, it's just, that's what we mean by they don't care. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you're still going to have all the avocados you want.
Exactly. Let's finish with this. I referred to this last week. I know I've talked about this in other contexts, but let's talk about it again now, a little bit more context instead of alluding to it. The story about the widow's mite, which occurs in Mark and in Luke, it occurs at the end of Mark chapter 12. Now, I know some of you are driving a car or whatever you might be doing, might not, and maybe you might want to stop this and listen to it later when you have access to a Bible, whether it's on your phone or whether you can sit down in front of a Bible. Mark 12, 41 through 44. It says Jesus was going into the treasury, which is in the temple. Rich people were putting money in their coffers. And a poor widow, verse 42, came up and put in 2 small copper coins, which amount to a cent, meaning the 2 coins she has is not enough to buy a loaf of bread. And Jesus said, truly I say to you, this poor widow, verse 43, put in more than all the other contributors to the treasury, for she put in out of her surplus, for they put in out of their surplus, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. Now, I mentioned this before, that we preach sermons on this saying, wow, what a beautiful example of sacrificial giving. And that is exactly not what Jesus is talking about. I think Jesus is irate. This woman does not have enough money to buy a loaf of bread, and you are making her give. Now, how's she going to go buy a loaf of bread? She didn't have enough beforehand. Now what's she going to do? Oh, what a beautiful sacrificial giving. The rich, however, and I think we said this maybe even last week, they give $40,000 out of their $400,000 salary, and it doesn't impact them at all. Their lifestyle's not changed. But the poor give $3,000 of their $30,000 salary, and it absolutely radically takes food off their table. That's not what Jesus is talking about. And how do I know that? Look at the context. Verse 40, right before verses 38 through 40. Beware of the scribes who walk around in long robes, respectful greetings in the marketplace. They're like chief seats in the synagogues. Verse 40, they devour widows' houses. The next story, 2 verses later, a poor widow came in. This is a story about those in power devouring widows' houses. Next story, Mark chapter 13. There's a chapter break. And the next story is, do you not see this temple? Not one stone will be left upon another. The consequence of what you're doing in devouring widows' houses is the temple is going to be destroyed. Now, you can go to Luke's gospel to see the same thing. So Luke chapter 20 ends with, beware the scribes. Verse 47, that's the last verse of Luke 20, who devour widows' houses. Then we put the chapter break in the Gospel of Luke then. Verse 1 of chapter 21 says, he saw many rich people putting their gifts in the treasury, which is in the temple. He saw a poor widow putting in 2 copper coins, and he says the same thing. Then we have verse 5 and verse 6, look at this temple, not one stone will be left upon another. So Luke's Gospel, the chapter breaks comes and puts the widow's gift with the offering, with the destruction of the temple, whereas Mark's Gospel puts the chapter break after that. The point of that is, we talk about sacrificial giving, but the only people that we ask to give sacrificially are the poor. Because I'm sorry, 10% sustain. Wait a minute, what are we doing here? Now, let me add one more thing onto this. Actually, 2 thoughts. Maybe I'll do both. We'll see how it goes. Hurricane Katrina or great natural disaster happens in the fall of whatever, and all of a sudden on the ticker during an NFL game, it will be Robert Kraft, owner of the New England Patriots, donates $1 million for hurricane relief. Tom Brady, owner of the Oakland Raiders. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Say that again. Tom Brady, owner of the partial owner of the Las Vegas
Both
Raiders.
those things just hurt really bad that you just said. Both part A and B of that sentence.
Anyway, but we talk about all the owners of these football teams. They gave $1 million. Jerry Jones' net worth is $16.6 billion.
Yep.
If he gives $1 million,
that's nothing.
You know what? Great. I'm glad that you did that. But it does not belong on a ticker because we make a big deal out of that, but that is nothing to him. It takes no foot off his table.
That's me giving $10 to the homeless guy in front of Panda Express.
No, it's you giving 10 cents. Because that's $10 means I'm not going to go get a hamburger today, which I don't do anyways. But $10 means that's 1/3 of a round of golf. It comes out of my golf budget. And that means I just can't play 10 rounds of golf this summer. I can only play 9. Okay? It directly impacts us. 10 cents doesn't change anything for me. That's the reality. It's why are we bragging about these wealthy people giving these large sums of money? That's great. But the reality is it doesn't actually even affect them at all. No. And churches have the same problem because we listen to the large donors. That's why the 7 years I was a pastor in Bakersfield, I never knew who gave and who gave what. Because I was never going to be influenced by who gives and how much they give. The American political landscape now is ruled by donors and by large corporate donors and large donors. So you look at John Mearsheimer. He's a political scientist, a political theorist in University of Chicago. He's all over the internet now. He does a great job of giving reports and giving presentations, talking about the war in Ukraine, talking about the war in Israel and everything else. He wrote a book along with, I think, Walt, or a professor from the University. He's from the University of Chicago, professor from Harvard. They wrote a book called The Israel Lobby. The story behind it is they were asked to write this in early 2000s by the Atlantic Journal or whatever it might have been. And right before it went to publication, they said, you know what, we're not going to publish it. And they tried to go through other publications and others, and no one would publish it. So they finally got a publisher because they did it as a book instead of as an article. And his argument is that the most powerful lobby in the United States Congress is the Israel lobby. And I've written a couple of blogs about this about a year ago because people were running for re-election in New York. One was in New York and one was in like Minnesota, perhaps, and state congresses, or maybe one was like state representatives for Congress, not state representatives, but congressional representatives from that state. And they spoke against the war in Israel. And AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee, which is the most powerful committee in Washington, D.C., donated in one case $12 million to the opposing candidate in a primary election, meaning this wasn't even going to guarantee who's going to win the election. It's just going to guarantee you don't even get elected by the party to go on the ballot in November. And then one was $12 million, one was $8 million, and they lost the election. So what happens then is congresspersons know they can't speak against Israel because their primary source of funding comes from AIPAC. And again, we're not bashing Israel because we love Israel, we love the people, but we have to be able to be critical. But you can't be critical because if you do, you'll lose your job. And so we had this doctor on, to go back to that again this morning, and she was talking about the experiences in Gaza. And one of the points, and I'll make some clips on this, and she said, I was realizing that what I was seeing in Gaza is not what's being reported in Britain. So I started giving reports, and she gave a presentation at some forum one time. And she said, when she was done, 2 medical workers came up and said, what are you doing? Because you realize you're never going to be allowed back into Gaza. And so she had a question with, do I speak up about what's going on, or do I continue my medical work in Gaza? And she continues to speak up. She got denied entrance in February of 2025, but she was able to get back in May. She's not sure, speaking to us this morning, if that's going to hamper her. She's been on Democracy Now! She's been on all kinds of other things. And this is what power and money do, is they influence and control what we even think and believe because what people are willing to say. And I think that's really important, that we have a certain ideology about the rich and the poor because those in power want us to have that ideology. And I think that's influenced the church.
Say, case in point regarding the influence of the top and the powerful. Look at the shift that Tucker Carlson has made in the last year, where when he was on Fox News, he, like everyone else, is a complete apologist for Israel. And now look at what he's done in his podcast. I know that you approached some of that. Was it in your blog that you addressed that, or did you make a video? You did something.
I approached one.
You did the video.
I referred to one of his videos
with Ted Cruz
in one of his interviews in a blog.
Yeah. I think you made a video,
not to necessarily endorse Tucker Carlson, but you're right.
And that wasn't just a one-time thing that he was saying. It's over and over again. He's had a complete shift. Do you think? I don't think he's had an ideological shift in what's happening. What happens now is he's an independent journalist and he has a YouTube channel. He could say whatever he wants, whereas before he's under his employer said, Fox News says there's no way we do that.
Exactly.
And it just goes to show we're fed what to believe. And even these, which also goes to show, okay, what's the credibility of a journalist if they're willing to be that dogmatic about something and then shift 180 degrees? It's okay, buddy. I'm glad you're saying what you're saying now, but it was perfectly fine when you're getting paid multi-millions of dollars. And it's just because the integrity of the person. But the fact of the matter is, that's what's happening. And so we also need to be aware of what we're hearing from any news source that you think of. It's the people who have the purse strings that are controlling what the people are saying.
And I go into this in a lot of detail with respect to what the message of the book of Revelation in the Revelation Revealed series. One of the things I argue there, and I'll be very brief here, is point number one is, unless we realize, and you and I discussed before, just recently on this podcast, unless we realize that deception is aimed at us, the church, that we also could be deceived, then there's no sense of going any further in the conversations. Because if we think that we're right and there's no way that we're wrong, and don't realize that power is trying to influence our beliefs and that we have been deceived by that, then there's no sense of having a conversation.
Totally agree.
But as soon as we realize that, it changes the game. Oh, those in power write the textbooks.
Yep. Amen.
Yep. And those in power control the media. And they do, because the media tries to make now that we have this independent journalists, you're getting a lot of wacky stuff on both sides.
And that's the thing,
you're also getting a lot more truth.
And that's the thing is, there's more options out there. It's not controlled. But you also have to be aware of it. Okay, what do you believe now? Talk about postmodernism and saying what is truth.
But that's exactly the way the devil wants us to go.
I agree.
Before, he just inundated us with propaganda. Now there's so much out there, you don't even know what to believe. Just go ahead and believe what makes you comfortable.
Exactly. Hey, Rob,
all right, brother.
Most important thing as we wrap up, I wish that you continue to have a great draft in our fantasy football draft. You've been doing very well so
Thanks.
far.
I think I've been feeling good. How do you feel?
I'm actually feeling I'm worried about a couple guys because I have some injury-prone guys, but they'll be big hits if they stay healthy. So I'm doing okay with my draft so far.
Yeah. I've got an Oakland. Oh, sorry.
Dang it! Why
Las
do you do
Vegas
that?
Raiders on my team. I didn't mean to do that, by the way. I didn't mean to do that. That was just
exactly.
But I've got a Raider on my
Ashton
team,
Genty.
and that's just hard to say. But at least Tom Brady is a partial owner. It gives me a little bit of team.
That's a joke.
So we'll see how the season goes this year.
Yeah. All right, everyone. We'll catch you guys next week.
I want to thank you for joining us on today's podcast, and we would love for you to share the work of Determined Truth with others. Please follow this podcast and give a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Your review will go a long way towards helping others find this podcast. Then share it with others so that we can get the word of the gospel of the kingdom to more people.